particularly for me as I'm thinking about how to transition a course on manuscript study, where in the past I had the good fortune, wonderful fortune of teaching students with manuscripts in the Wren in the Parker Library, and now trying to make that an online course. And your talk made me think about what I had to make transparent about what I was doing in this course and what was achievable. But the other thought that your talk prompted when you were talking about the phenomenological aspect of encounters with manuscripts and encounters with the digital was really a question about how far we bring our experience of the physical manuscripts to our experience of the digital. And I think, trying to imagine my own experience, when I look at digitized images of a manuscript with which I'm already familiar, I think I am imagining that manuscript. Therefore, what I'm seeing is also something that's in my mind's eyes, remembered experience. But when I look at digitized images of either a manuscript with which I'm not familiar, or even more a kind of manuscript with which I'm not familiar, then I'm seeing very much what you were describing as these flattened, disembodied parts of manuscripts. And I don't think I'd ever been aware of that difference before. So thank you. But it also made me think even more about how can one then use digital resources to teach students about physical manuscripts if they've not experienced the physical manuscripts themselves. And I imagine that this is something which people who do not teach manuscript studies in Cambridge or Oxford or places with plentiful resources will already have grappled with. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are and advice really on this. Sorry, that was very, very long-winded.
I mean, but so beautifully put, and so timely, as I think lots of, here teaching has already started, and these issues are, and for art historians as well, with the objects in the museums and galleries that they're so used to showing students. I was talking to a colleague, Shiva Meehan, at Harvard last week, and she said they're so incredibly busy with virtual exhibitions and virtual demonstrations, and the amount of thought and care that has to go into the curating of that particular class's exhibition, because what can you choose that really helps to highlight the points that you're making when there's the physical distancing of space and screen. So I think it's a very pertinent question, and it's one that really used to really vex me, because when I first came to Stanford 8 years ago, I was talking to Ben Albritton, and I was like, we must develop a tool that allows us to do sort of it's actually four-dimensional demonstrations of manuscripts online, just at the touch of a button, so that even using haptic technology and sensor pads, and that's technology that's already developed and used really effectively in dentistry and in engineering, so that you could, using the sensory pad, students could use the sensory pad and they would actually feel the membrane as they turned the virtual pages, and then you'd recreate the experience. And isn't that what we should be doing? And we never did do that, and other teams are developing similar kinds of tools and methods and approaches. But I think it comes back to what I was trying to say, which is in effect that misses the point, that the object of study, when we're having to look at things virtually, is actually it's different. It's a different thing. You cannot replicate the experience. And you can't, in particular, replicate the experience. And I think manuscript scholars know this, but also colleagues, scholar citizens who go to exhibitions, who went to the Anglo-Saxon Kingdoms exhibition and saw the manuscripts in cases, where in effect the book becomes something else. It's not a book anymore. You can't interact with it. It becomes an art object, but nevertheless you see the thing in medieval case, literally in the flesh. That kind of auratic experience, I think, it's a different kind of auratic experience with working with the virtual or the online. Nevertheless, videos. And Lisa did her plenary, and she was waving those two fragments around, saying, "Listen to the difference in the noise." Videos can kind of help create something of the experience, but there has to be an acknowledgement that the experience that students will have, scholars too, when they're looking at new manuscripts, it can't be compared. And I think that's the kind of issue, is this comparison sets up a hierarchy where what you do in the classroom virtually, or what you do as a scholar with an online repository, is less than. It's about lack and absence in relation to working with the object in the Green Library or in the Wren. And I think if we could think less in terms of hierarchies and less thans, and more in terms of what can this object do for me that object couldn't, or how can I study this comparatively but without that sense of value judgment, that would be really helpful. Now I say that, not sure that I can do it myself, but I say that might be a goal that we could think about, is how to lessen that sense of loss and absence and lack. Ways that you can generate the same kinds of excitement would be through the use of all of the YouTube videos that show the production of parchment, or which I'm sure you do anyway, Tessa, or videos of people going through a manuscript, so that you get that sense of time and the kinesthetic interaction with the codex, or turning over the fragments, so you get that sense of the depth, the voluminousness, even of the thinnest kind of fragment. It's its own dimensionality. And then recounting your experiences, because I think your experience, students listening to you talk about the experience you had with that was unexpected or surprising, provides that sense of enthusiasm and excitement, sufficient for them perhaps to go and visit. So lots of people can come into special collections. Anyone can come to special collections here. Undergraduates work with our manuscript materials, and I'm sure it's the same in lots of other institutions. And so at some point they can use the knowledge that they've acquired. Actually, Tessa, when you studied paleography, so I was a student, God, I don't know, decades ago, and I worked with Alexander Rumble, and I put this on Twitter actually. We worked from appalling photocopies, and I had seen manuscripts in the British Library, or British Museum as it was, and I had seen manuscripts at John Rylands, but I hadn't really worked, I don't think I had really worked with a manuscript as an undergraduate, possibly at all. It was through microfilm and bad photocopies. What I took to those manuscripts when I got access to them as a PhD student, or actually as a master's student in the archives, was I was already trained. I could already read manorial court rolls, ecclesiastical records. My Latin was even reasonable at that point. It's not now, but it was then. And I, in a sense, I kind of knew what I was looking at. And now, is it the case that students will be presented with a 14th century Italian collection of hagiographies, and they do this as part of their normal paleography or archival studies courses, and you can train them kind of in person, but is that somehow preferable to having gone through that process of really learning the kind of basics about script and about codicology even before you got your hands on things? Because I wonder, the way that we look at manuscripts online, okay, I can only talk for myself. The way I look at manuscripts online is often so kind of like this. I'm looking for an N, or I'm looking for the ruling pattern or whatever it is. And this inattention that we talk of in relation to our 20-year-olds, the tweet size kind of knowledge provision that we talk about as being, people can't concentrate anymore. They can only read things. They can only focus on things for the length of an article. That one could argue that that same attribute of kind of brevity and lack of concentration or focus is actually really encouraged by the prolific nature of digital aspects, and the fact that the entire manuscript is available, and the British Library data will tell you that it's all the same scribe also wrote these other 3 manuscripts. So you kind of, you pull those other 3 manuscripts up. I mean, I wonder if the slowness that comes from the old style paleography, which you can replicate digitally because you can have them look at a single page for the entirety of a paleographical session, if that isn't a really useful way of getting our students ready for that moment when they sit in front of the manuscript in the reading room and know what it is that they're looking at. So in one sense, I wouldn't worry, but I also, I've heard you talk about manuscripts, Tessa. If you don't draw them in just through the way you talk about them, I would be completely surprised, because I think just that one's own enthusiasm is infectious when you're teaching.
I mean, like you, my teaching, my exposure to paleography was through not very good black and white photocopies, and without seeing a single manuscript until, and this was at library school, until Andrew Watson took us in sort of 2s and 3s into his office, where he had a couple of manuscripts, and looking at a manuscript and seeing something in the margin and thinking, oh, have I found something really important here? Look, and you say, oh, well, that's just a correction because the scribe had sort of that sort of wanting to discover something and then finding something, being told, no, that's entirely conventional. But I think the difference maybe for us, well, I think the challenge from a pedagogical point of view is you were putting forward really very, very well about this sort of honesty and transparency about what it is we're dealing with when we have a digital object in front of us. I suppose one thing that we have, that the digital helps us with, is to draw in more people who might otherwise have not thought that paleography was terribly important, and making more of the scholarly community within medieval studies or beyond medieval studies realize that these things are very important and why they're important. But I am also interested in the experiential aspect of it, and what we bring with our memories to what we look at, and being the awareness of that when we teach, that our students don't have that in their heads. Or and this just, the digital seems to bring a hugely sort of greater dimension to all of this. I know this is something that that Suzette van Horen is interested in, and I don't know whether I feel I should sort of bow out at that point and let other people say have something talk about this too.
Just like the Alberto Manguel, who was Borges's reader when Borges went blind, in The Library at Night, I think it is, or The Library of the Mind, because both of those works are really fantastic, talks about it's not just it's not just what we experience that affects how we view the world, but the order in which we experience it, the order, the ways that we make connections through the things that we know in the sequence in which we have experienced them. And so that idea of the individual's perception and the fact that it can never be the same as anyone else's perception, I think is also, it's really worth articulating that. I think it's really important for us to articulate that to our students, actually, Tessa, because we forget, don't we, how much we know or have seen in relation to that student's first experience. And I have had a student called Caroline Stein, who's worked for me for the last quarter, who's done a 56-page analysis of manuscript repositories online as a novice. She's not a medievalist, she's not a manuscript scholar, and she was a sophomore when she wrote this paper, which we're going to publish in the next few weeks once we've finished just sorting out some of the screenshots. And the way that she sees the British Library landing page, digitized manuscripts landing page, the way that she sees the Walters Art Museum, the way that she sees Parker on the web, is completely different from what I anticipated. The issues that she had as a novice approaching this material, I thought she would say, you know, what is FF full stop? What does that mean? Folios, right? That's not at all what she has focused on as areas of concern for her. So I think that just that general kind of user experience of the online, we need to see more of that. And if Suzette is doing, that's absolutely brilliant if she's doing that. And certainly, I think we can have a lot more of that in our classrooms, more space for students to reflect upon what it is that they are seeing, and then the way in which you're able to bring your own experience of a manuscript. It's a bit like I'm walking into a cathedral. How do you ever explain that sense of scale and space to somebody who has not been in that building? I think of books as edifices, and you know, how do you explain dimensionality when it's so relative? Or how do you explain the sensory when the online experience is a different sensory experience? How do you explain the fullness of the sensory? Really interesting, really interesting.
If I might just interject one thing, what about actually representing a book as a building? You know, you have this metaphor in Augustine, you know, the cathedral of scripture, that he, you know, it's humble without, lofty within, and covered in mysteries, as he says in there. I mean, one could actually imagine the leaves of a book, or a book organized as a structure that one navigates with. We'll be coming on to this again later, I think, in the Future of Scholarship panel, but this will come back as well to what you and Ben Albritton were discussing yesterday about play and about liberation and moving away maybe from. Right,
and I've written about Tessa's manuscript that she personally possesses, the Eadwyn Assaulter. I've written about that book as a building, partly because if you look at it in its sort of tripartite structure, you can think about the nave of a church and the side aisles, and often the litera notabiliores are at the top of the respective psalm columns, and so you can think about it as kind of, you know, the clear story triforium level stained glass. So you can actually think about books in that more architectural way, and it's really useful. And as you say, Stephen, you know, at least Augustinian, if not even earlier than that, in terms of the way that the codex and learning itself are conceived.
Thank you. I thought there are actually a huge stream of questions that have resulted from your conversation about phenomenology and about experience. I just wanted to move, as time is pressing, onto a question that Henrika has asked, Henrika Leinemann, in the chat.
Yeah.
What are the chances for closer collaboration between collection? Oh, I'll let her ask it. She's there. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Elaine.
So
I'm in a similar position to you both, Tessa, in trying to prepare for teaching history of the book and codicology. And one model we came up when preparing actually for the blogging manuscript sessions between the Bodleian curators and myself was to
the curators volunteered to be the kind of extended senses for users, and in a way working as a magnifying glass, as extended hands. So we were thinking of having as a prize for a pitch for blogging manuscripts, an hour consulting the manuscript through a curator, and by that, in a way, enhancing the experience even to the personal touch. And meanwhile, we have been taking this one step further and thinking of joint seminars where we would bring together fragments from different collections with a curator in each place handling the object, and then students and researchers combined in the virtual space to discuss this. And then, of course, you have to kind of verbalize what you feel, what you see, but that might actually help if you have to describe feeling to others, in enhancing and bringing out a richer description than you could have done just with your own personal 5 senses, and this, to have this kind of sensus communis through a shared community of scholars.
Actually, it's really interesting. So 5 senses. So Merleau-Ponty would have it that we've got at least 12 senses, and the sense of touch is the one that yields all of the others, the kinesthetic and the proprioceptive, so moving through things. What you're saying is, I think, is absolute. That's a brilliant reminder to me too, Henrika, that so in the Green Library, Ben Albritton has bought, well, I suppose it's like a docu-cam, and he's set that up for the faculty this coming year. He will sit, you can call up a manuscript and he will be in your classroom showing students the manuscript, or you know, if they want to see a particular folio or whatever. I think that collaboration is absolutely, just if the special collections are open in your library, it can also be the public library, of course, then I think that is a wonderful collaboration. And at the very least, one could, I assume, kind of video on the phone or something like that if you don't even have the proper equipment. And it's a wonderful extension, you're right, a wonderful extension of a student's experience with a manuscript, to have it literally in front of them, and yet strangely not.
So
yeah.
Andrew is just posting in the chat, Andrew Dunning, one of our curators, that he would be very happy to extend the invitation to touch via him the bodily and manuscript. So if you have a topic or a manuscript you would like to explore, please get in contact with Andrew Dunning, Matthew Holford, or colleagues around, like Anne Wakelin, like myself, who could have shared interest, and we can club together to try to figure out the manuscript.
I also, carrying around like bits of vellum. This is not medieval, obviously, because my handwriting, trying to emulate. Just even showing that kind of thing to students can give them that sense of the materiality of the object. Lisa's commenting about, you know, you can't be part of the manuscript's history if you can't handle it, etc. But really, when we think about the experience of the vast majority of the world's population, including all of those people, 100,000 plus, who went through the Anglo-Saxon Kingdoms exhibition, you know, they don't get to touch manuscripts. We are incredibly privileged, and our students are incredibly privileged to be able to do this. How do we permit others' experiences of manuscripts to not feel less than, right? To not kind of suggest that if you can't commune with the thing itself, that somehow your experience is inadequate. I think it's important to think about all of the others who experience these books, and to have their experience be valid and authentic. I was going right back to that first question, and authentic in and of itself, whatever that itself might be.
Yeah, in a way, it's I'm working on late medieval devotional manuscripts, and the nuns are constantly meditating on receiving the communion, even if they aren't getting it. And they put the case up that they receive more through direct spiritual communion with Christ than if they were to get it through the priest. So we can have it as a spiritual communion with a manuscript.
And I'm teaching pilgrimage this quarter, and I'm part of the cyber pilgrimage and virtual pilgrimage, so people who never set foot on the path itself physically, but for whom the experience is as authentic and certainly as salvific as if they made the journey itself. So yeah, that's a whole other subject, and really, really profoundly interesting, I think. Oh, you're on mute, Stephen.
Good. The more muted, the better. So Dorothy Africa says, I have heard of, I think you can see the text, workshops where physical models, medieval book structures are handed around. And she's saying this seems helpful for people who've never had the chance to actually handle manuscripts.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Tessa and Henrika, and certainly I know Orietta Doyle in Cambridge does this too, kind of creating materiality from the materials that you've got. So whether you can get a piece of calf skin, as I was just waving around, from a modern parchmenter, so either from Blackwell's or from Jessie Meyer, who runs Pergamena in New York State, that students can feel the furrier flesh side and the sort of waxier or whatever hair side. They can listen to the noise. They can create choirs out of just paper, but different kinds of paper, from heavy paper. That you can, I agree totally with Dorothy that it's really important to give students and any experiencers an idea of the construction and the materiality of the object. It doesn't have to be the 12th century Psalter or whatever. It doesn't have to be that. There are ways to bring materiality into the class. So yeah, little models are a very good idea. And you can get a complete set of historical book models from the University of Iowa Center for the Book. It's quite expensive, but Special Collections could possibly afford it. And they have, you can buy replicas that are hand stitched and so on, including one of the Cuthbert Gospel, fascinating thing that was done as a conservation, understanding conservation exercise.
There's a question here from Anna Dorofeeva. Can you see that one? Elaine's point that touching the manuscript is not necessarily essential to experience is also important for, e.g., cancer survivors and other people who've gone through physical or mental trauma. They can lose their touch in their fingers or entirely. Can digital materiality make up for this?
That is right.
Maybe
that is really central. That is such a central point. That phenomenologically, that is such a central point. Merleau-Ponty talks about the human condition and about the ways in which humans perceive through the agency of their body, so that our perception of the world is as an embodied consciousness. This is in contradiction to Cartesian intellectualism, and in contradiction to those who would see the world as something separate, for all objects separate from the body and the mind. So that embodied consciousness is critically important. So it's critically important. What is critically important to recognize that nobody's experience is the same as anybody else's experience, even if you're sitting in the same room looking at the same thing. Because some people are colorblind, some people have various neuropathologies. People's hearing is different. People's abilities to perceive things, depth perception and so on is different. So nobody's experience is the same. And yes, the digital allows us to do all kinds of different things, to zoom in on, you know, the most incredible minutiae, to change the size of something. I mean, the way in which things like this, is it Snapdragon, Sea-Dragon, that zoom functionality functions to allow us to see the level of kind of individual spots of ink and so on, is not a way that a medieval scribe would ever have seen or conceived of the work that they were doing. And so it changes everything. But I think it's really important. So thank you for that, you know, Anna, for that really significant point. Everybody's embodied consciousness of their apprehension of the world is different from everybody else's. And we talked yesterday about the provisionality of scholarship. Well, you know, experience in a sense has that contingency about it too. So the way we talk about what we do is obviously, it's fine and it's personal to us, but our expectations of how others receive this information and can process it and experience it is not going to be the same as ours. Oh, which then contradicts what our last
Indeed,
yeah.
better stated. But we are very nearly at the end
of time. The end of time, yeah.
I have one comment here from my co-host, Anthony Lappin. I think he must be heard. He says, yet one of the purposes of any education is to get people to pass experiences in similar, even unified ways.
I would respectfully disagree.
Tremendous. And on that note, we are reaching 4:30, so there is not time for him to respond. The good news is that there is now an entire session in 15 minutes devoted to these and other topics that's chaired by Peter Frankopan, that Elaine will be joining along with a host of other speakers. So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Elaine, above all, and see you in 15 minutes.
Thanks.
Thank you.